If you were to imagine unidentified flying objects, UFOs, hovering over the White House, a science fiction film might flash to mind. Maybe you'd envision a scary moment from Independence Day or an old B-movie like Earth vs. the Flying Saucers. However, for a group of eyewitnesses in 1952, such a scenario didn't come from a Hollywood production. Instead, it was a stunning and surreal scene from real life. During the early 1950s, UFOs happened to be on many people's minds. News stories and comic books speculated on the topic of alien life visiting Earth, and across America, cinemas often showed pictures like Flying Disc Man from Mars, The Man from Planet X, and The Thing from Another World. On top of that, UFO sightings were being reported in dozens of states. This trend may have originated when in 1947 a pilot named Kenneth Arnold claimed to have spotted 9 flying saucers over Mount Rainier. This extraterrestrial mania probably tapped into a larger paranoia. The massive destruction brought by World War II, the rise of the atomic bomb, and the draw of the Cold War unsettled millions of Americans. Thoughts of invasion and threats from above captured the collective unconscious. The public was primed for aliens. On the night of Saturday, July 19th, Edward Nugent was on duty at Washington National Airport. Today it's called Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Nugent, an air traffic controller, noticed something peculiar just before midnight. 7 unidentifiable objects appeared on his radar screen. They were flying just southwest of the city, and they weren't flying along any established military or commercial flight path either. Nugent asked his co-workers to look at his equipment. Was it malfunctioning? They examined it and assured him it wasn't, and so Nugent asked his supervisor to come look at his screen. Around the same time, 2 other controllers in the tower noticed a bright light in the night sky. In the distance, this light hung in the air for a moment, then tremendously fast, it shot out of sight. The controllers decided to contact commercial airplanes in the area. They asked if the pilots had noticed anything out of the ordinary. SC Casey Pierman, the captain of Capital Airlines Flight 807, responded. In 1961, Capital Airlines and United Airlines merged. Pierman said he saw 6 bright lights streaking like falling stars, except those falling stars had no tails. Despite the tension, some of the controllers tried to lighten the mood that night by joking about aliens. For example, Nugent wisecracked to his supervisor that they were dealing with a fleet of flying saucers. Andrews Air Force Base, which is now part of Joint Base Andrews, is situated in Prince George's County, Maryland. It's less than 20 miles from the Washington airport, and that night in 1952, its radar screens were picking up the same phenomena. A group of blips, all belonging to unknown aircraft, were moving together slowly. Suddenly, they were gone, all of them zooming away at more than 7,000 miles an hour. In addition, an Andrews Air Force Base controller looked out the tower window and saw a UFO passing by. He said it resembled a fireball. It was orange and had a tail. Then the controllers came to a shocking realization. Those flying objects were heading toward the White House and the U.S. Capitol. At once, 2 F-94 Interceptor Jets, jets designed to attack enemy aircraft, mobilized. They took off from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware because the Andrews Air Force Base runway was being repaired. The jets raced towards the radar blips. However, each time a jet neared a blip's location, the blip would vanish from their screen. The jets remained in the air until they ran out of fuel. At that point, they returned to Newcastle. As soon as the jets returned, though, the blips reappeared on the radar. That led to a startling question. Could those UFOs, whatever they were, comprehend government and military radio communications? Nevertheless, when the sun rose on the morning of Sunday, July 20th, 1952, all traces of the UFOs had disappeared. But they weren't gone for good. Rather, just 1 week later, on Saturday, July 26th, it all happened again. At approximately 8 p.m. on the night of July 26th, a commercial airliner was approaching Washington National Airport. Suddenly, a flight attendant and a pilot both saw unexplainable lights in the sky above their plane. At the airport, the same team of air traffic controllers from the prior week was at work. And once again, their radar screens picked up unidentifiable clusters of blips, groups that moved slowly and then whizzed away. What could possibly be going on? This time, some of the controllers had a theory. It was a temperature inversion. A temperature inversion happens in the lowest level of the atmosphere. When a layer of warm air settles atop a layer of cooler air, the cooler air can get trapped. When that happens, the warmer layer can sometimes deflect radar signals, which can create an illusion on radar screens. It looks like objects on the ground are high up in the air. It's kind of a radar mirage. At Andrews Air Force Base, though, the controllers couldn't accept the temperature inversion theory. From their observations, they were certain the blips represented real aircraft. Once again, two F-94s went looking for those blips, and the results were the same. Each time a jet came close to one, it vanished from the radar screens. William Patterson, one of the jet pilots, actually glimpsed several UFOs. He even tried, to no avail, to chase one of the mysterious bright lights he saw. He flew after it as fast as he could. After this harrowing night, newspapers throughout the U.S. covered these UFO sightings with large, alarming headlines. Predictably, across the country, many people panicked. President Harry Truman felt he had to react to these reports. Truman was the first U.S. president to respond to a UFO sighting. He asked his aides to investigate the incident further, and those aides knew just the person to contact: Captain Edward James Rupel. Edward J. Rupel was born in 1923, and he grew up in Iowa. As a young Army Air Corps bombardier, he flew World War II combat missions with courage and distinction. In 1951, Rupel earned an aeronautical engineering degree from Iowa State College, and he proceeded to serve in the Korean War. He was then stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio. There, he worked at the Air Technical Intelligence Center. Starting in March 1952, Captain Rupel led Project Blue Book. It was an Air Force study that investigated as many UFO reports as possible. A few days after the first UFO sightings in Washington, Rupel happened to be in the Capitol on business. And while in town, he read news reports about the incident. Generally speaking, the July 19 UFO encounters weren't a national news story. Rupel asked government officials for a car so he could go to the National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base and investigate the matter. Oddly enough, though, this request was turned down. Rupel was back in Ohio when Truman's aides called. He told them over the phone that a full inquiry was needed. He also said, perhaps to calm their nerves, that a temperature inversion may have been responsible. Then, Rupel was undercut yet again. On July 29th, Air Force officials chose to hold an unusually lengthy news conference at the Pentagon about the Washington, D.C. UFOs. They wanted to ensure that alien-related mass hysteria wouldn't break out. However, no one in the Air Force told Rupel about the press conference beforehand, and for sure, no one consulted him about what should be said at the event. At the news conference, Major General John A. Samford evaded many reporters' questions. He also asserted that the lights people saw were meteors, stars, or even just illusions. Likewise, he stated, firmly and repeatedly, that a temperature inversion caused the radar irregularities.
We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any department of the United States.
After that press conference, the general public, by and large, seemed reassured. In fact, the number of daily UFO sightings in the U.S. dropped by a whopping 80%. Even so, Rupel was now convinced that a temperature inversion did not lead to those UFO incidents. In 1953, for whatever reason, Rupel asked the Air Force if he could leave Project Blue Book for a new assignment. Soon after that, he retired from the military. Rupel went on to work in the private sector, becoming an aerospace professional. By 1960, Rupel was on record as being positive that extraterrestrials never visited Earth and that all UFOs had some other explanation. Tragically, when he was in his 30s, Rupel was not in good health. He suffered a serious heart attack in 1956. Then, on September 15, 1960, Captain Edward James Rupel died of another heart attack. He was 37 years old. Soon after the July 1952 UFO sightings, the CIA formed a panel to study them. The following January, this group publicly revealed its conclusion: temperature inversions were indeed to blame. The Air Force, for its part, officially ended Project Blue Book in December 1969. Just before closing up permanently, it issued a report that said no evidence ever existed to support the idea that UFOs were extraterrestrial aircraft. To this day, many Americans disbelieve Project Blue Book's conclusions. In particular, some people doubt the government's stance on the so-called Washington invasion. Skeptics continue to feel that the U.S. government has long been hiding something. Could those 1952 UFOs have been secret military weapons? Might they have been advanced Russian spy planes? Or, just possibly, could they have carried visitors from worlds beyond? In any event, UFO enthusiasts came up with a nickname for those strange events from the summer of 1952: the Big Flap. The Big Flap represents one of the earliest and one of the most intriguing UFO conspiracy theories. It's been the subject of books, news articles, TV programs, websites, and even TikTok videos. In the annals of UFO lore, those flying objects in Washington stand out because they weren't merely glimpsed by people on the ground. Rather, multiple people in multiple locations witnessed them. Beyond that, airport and military radar equipment detected them. And in an extremely unusual circumstance, U.S. military jets actually chased them. For all these reasons, the 1952 Washington invasion contains scenes destined to play again and again in many people's imaginations, just like scenes from classic science fiction films.